Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on May 21, 1960. To the outside world, his family seemed normal. His father, Lionel, was a chemist, and his mother, Joyce, was a homemaker. However, behind closed doors, their marriage was filled with tension and constant fighting. This difficult home environment made young Jeffrey feel isolated and ignored. He was a shy and quiet child who struggled to make friends. He often felt like an outsider, unable to connect with other children his age. This profound sense of loneliness would follow him throughout his entire life, shaping the dark path he would eventually take. As Dahmer entered his teenage years, his strange interest began to surface. He developed a fascination with dead animals. He would collect roadkill, bringing the carcasses of squirrels, birds, and other small creatures back to a shed behind his family's home in Bath, Ohio. There he would dissect them, studying their anatomy and experimenting with ways to preserve their bones. He used chemicals to dissolve their flesh, keeping the skeletons as trophies. This macabre hobby was a secret world he created for himself, a place where he felt in control. His parents were mostly unaware of the true extent of these disturbing activities, seeing him as just a withdrawn and unusual boy. His social life at school did not improve. He was known for his odd behavior, sometimes pulling pranks to get attention, but he remained a loner. During this time, he started drinking heavily, often showing up to school with alcohol in a thermos. The drinking was a way to numb his feelings of anxiety and alienation. It also helped him cope with his emerging and confusing thoughts about his own sexuality. He realized he was gay but felt deep shame and fear about these feelings. The combination of social isolation, a troubled home life, and heavy drinking created a dangerous mix that pushed him further into his own dark world. The transition into adulthood only worsened Dahmer's problems. After a brief and unsuccessful stint at Ohio State University, he was pressured by his father to join the army. He served as a medical specialist in Germany, but his alcoholism led to his discharge. He returned to the United States, adrift and without purpose. He moved in with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. While she provided a stable home, Dahmer's internal struggles continued to grow. His fantasies became more intense and violent. He longed for total control over another person, someone who would never leave him. This desperate and twisted desire for companionship would soon lead him to commit his first murder. The first time Jeffrey Dahmer acted on his violent fantasies was in the summer of 1978, just weeks after he graduated from high school. He picked up a young hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. Dahmer invited Hicks back to his parents' house, promising him beer and a ride to a concert. Once there, his desire to keep Hicks from leaving took over. When Hicks tried to go, Dahmer struck him with a dumbbell and then strangled him to death. The act was clumsy and unplanned, driven by a desperate impulse. Afterward, he dismembered the body in his basement and hid the remains in the woods behind his house. This horrific crime marked a terrifying turning point, proving to Dahmer that he could turn his darkest thoughts into reality. After his discharge from the army, Dahmer's criminal behavior continued, though it took a different form for a while. Living with his grandmother, he was arrested for indecent exposure and disorderly conduct on several occasions. These were warning signs that his internal urges were becoming harder to control. In 1987, after a long gap of 9 years since his first murder, he killed again. He met a man named Stephen Tuomi at a Milwaukee bar and took him back to a hotel room. Dahmer later claimed he had no memory of the murder itself, only that he woke up next to Tuomi's dead body. He bought a large suitcase to transport the body back to his grandmother's house, where he dismembered it before disposing of the remains. This second murder opened the floodgates. From 1987 to 1991, Dahmer's killings became more frequent and methodical. He moved into his own apartment on North 25th Street in Milwaukee, which gave him the freedom to carry out his crimes without supervision. He targeted young men, often from minority communities, whom he met at gay bars, bus stops, and malls. He would lure them back to his apartment with promises of money or alcohol. His method was chillingly consistent. He would drug their drinks with sleeping pills and then strangle them once they were unconscious. This pattern allowed him to maintain a sense of complete control over his victims, fulfilling his twisted fantasy of creating a compliant partner. During this 4-year period, Dahmer's crimes escalated in depravity. He was no longer satisfied with just killing. He began performing gruesome experiments on his victims, both before and after their deaths. He drilled holes into their skulls and injected acid or boiling water in a twisted attempt to create a living zombie who would be completely subservient to him. When these experiments failed, he would dismember the bodies. He kept certain body parts, such as skulls and genitals, as mementos. In some cases, he even engaged in cannibalism, cooking and eating parts of his victims. His apartment, number 213, was slowly turning into a personal graveyard and a laboratory for his horrific obsessions. By July 1991, apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments had become a ghastly museum of death. The air was thick with the foul stench of chemicals and decay, a smell that neighbors had complained about for months. Dahmer explained it away as spoiled meat from a broken freezer. Inside, the small one-bedroom apartment was a scene of unbelievable horror. Body parts were stored in various places. A human head was kept in the refrigerator, while others were found in the freezer. Skulls, some of which had been painted, were displayed on a shelf. The freezer contained not just heads, but also human hearts and other organs, carefully packaged for later consumption. The tools of his gruesome trade were scattered throughout the apartment. A large blue 57-gallon drum, which he had used to dissolve bodies in acid, sat in the corner of his bedroom. Inside, police would later find a sludge containing the remains of several victims. Saws, knives, and a hypodermic needle were also present, evidence of the dismemberment and experiments that took place there. He had taken numerous Polaroid photographs of his victims at various stages of the process, documenting his horrific acts. These photos were a chilling record of his crimes, chronicling the mutilation and posing of the bodies. He kept them as trophies to relive his experiences when he was alone. The end for Dahmer came on the night of July 22, 1991. He had picked up a 32-year-old man named Tracy Edwards and brought him back to his apartment. As usual, Dahmer tried to subdue him, but Edwards was wary. When Dahmer tried to put a handcuff on him and threatened him with a knife, Edwards fought back. He managed to punch Dahmer and escape from the apartment, fleeing into the street with one handcuff dangling from his wrist. He flagged down a police car and told the officers that a freak had tried to kill him. The police, initially skeptical, agreed to accompany Edwards back to the apartment to retrieve the key for the handcuff. When the police entered Dahmer's apartment, they were immediately struck by the overwhelming smell. As one officer looked around the bedroom, Dahmer tried to stop him, but the officer saw a large knife under the bed. At that moment, the other officer opened a bedside table drawer and discovered the Polaroid pictures. The graphic and horrifying images showed dismembered bodies and human remains. Realizing they had stumbled upon something far more sinister than a simple assault, one officer famously said to the other, "These are real." Dahmer was immediately arrested. A full search of the apartment would soon reveal the true scale of the horror, uncovering the remains of at least 11 men. Following his arrest, Jeffrey Dahmer gave a surprisingly calm and detailed confession to the police. Over several days of interviews, he recounted the 17 murders he had committed over a period of 13 years. He spoke in a flat, emotionless tone, explaining his motivations with chilling clarity. He told investigators that his primary drive was a desperate fear of being abandoned. He did not want his victims to leave him, so he killed them to keep them with him forever. He explained his attempts to create zombies and his acts of cannibalism as parts of this twisted desire for a permanent, compliant companion. His confession provided a horrifying window into the mind of a serial killer. Dahmer's trial began in 1992. He pleaded guilty, but insane, meaning his defense team argued that he was not responsible for his actions due to mental illness. The trial became a battle between psychiatric experts. The prosecution argued that despite his disturbing paraphilias, Dahmer was sane and understood that his actions were wrong. They pointed to the careful planning of his crimes, his efforts to hide the evidence, and his ability to maintain a job and a semblance of a normal life. The jury ultimately agreed with the prosecution, finding Dahmer sane at the time of the murders. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms in prison, ensuring he would never be free again. Life in prison was dangerous for a man whose crimes had made him infamous. He was initially kept in protective isolation for his own safety. However, in 1994, he was moved into the general prison population at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. On the morning of November 28, 1994, while on cleaning duty with 2 other inmates, Dahmer was attacked. A fellow prisoner, Christopher Scarver, bludgeoned him to death with a metal bar from a piece of exercise equipment. Jeffrey Dahmer was 34 years old. His death brought an end to one of the most gruesome chapters in the history of American crime. The Jeffrey Dahmer case left a deep and lasting scar on society, particularly in Milwaukee. It exposed the horrifying reality of what one human being is capable of doing to others. The case also raised serious questions about police negligence and societal prejudice. It was revealed that police had once returned a dazed and naked 14-year-old victim, Konorak Symphonie, to Dahmer's custody, believing Dahmer's explanation that they were lovers having a dispute. This tragic mistake, possibly influenced by homophobia and racism, allowed Dahmer to continue his killing spree. The lessons learned from his case highlighted the importance of taking all reports seriously, and the need to look past biases to see the truth, however ugly it may be.